All right, here we are moving on. Notes for 4-10, Unit 4, Lesson 10. This is the second last lesson here, and this is for solving and graphing inequalities. So more of the kind of graphing with the opened and the closed circles and the shading like you were doing last lesson, and a little bit of solving back from like equation solving in previous lessons. So first piece here is a reminder that inequalities have an infinite number of solutions, meaning we cannot list them all, and that's why we do the shading on the graph with the arrow to show that they go on forever. Here we know that when we're solving inequalities, it's just like solving equations, meaning you're using that same process, meaning that you are still trying to do what to the variable. Remember, the goal of equation solving is to isolate. So we're still trying to isolate the variable using what kind of operations? What are those operations we're using when we're undoing them? AKA inverse operations. II there. Isolate the variable using those inverse operations. So everything is basically the same. When you're solving equations, you're still trying to get the variable alone. You're still doing the opposite. Except there's one difference, of course, because there's always one exception to every rule. There is a situation where you have to flip the inequality. So what I mean by flip the inequality is if you start with something like less than or equal to, that flips to greater than or equal to. You're never changing the fact if it's or equal to or not. You're just flipping the direction. So let's say you're flipping the direction of the inequality. So there are three things or three situations that you might run into where you need to flip the inequality when you're solving. And the first one is if you, keyword here, multiply by a negative number. The second situation where you would need to flip the inequality is if you divide by a negative number. And the reason that it's only multiply and divide and not like add and subtract or anything like that is because when you multiply something by a negative number, no matter what that something is, multiplying it or dividing it by a negative number is going to change the sign of that. So for example, a little sidebar here, if I start off with a positive number and then I divide it by a negative, that positive number is no longer positive, it's negative, and that makes a difference. Same kind of way as if I start off with a positive number and then I multiply it by a negative number, that positive number is now negative and changed, which makes a difference here. Okay. The last situation where you would need to flip your inequality is if you switch the placement of the variable. And we'll go through a brief little example of each of those. So if I'm multiplying by a negative number, that would be something like if I had x divided by -7, blah, 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 8, I would have to multiply both sides by -7, which would then flip that inequality to go that way. Boom. Notice how that inequality flipped. If you divide by a negative number in that same kind of way, if I start off with something like, Let's make this a little bit more organized. So if I start off with something like negative 2x blah 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 10, I divide both sides by negative 2. That changes or flips the direction of that sign. Notice the sign change. Actually, let's not even highlight that. Nope. Nope. Come on. Okay, let's just start over. Try this again. So, swoop, swoop, 10, divide, negative. I'm highlighting the part that's not highlighting. Highlighting the part where we're dividing by the negative. Multiplying by the negative over here. I don't know why my internet's not like functioning. Multiplying, which isn't right there, right here. And then here, this last one, switching the placement of the variable. For example, if the number is on the left-hand side and not the variable, and I want to switch them, I have to flip the placement, or flip the inequality there. Thanks. I feel like that was just a little rough on my part.